Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Prashansa, and I will be your host for this event. We are excited to have you all here today. The events will follow the same instructions as before. We'll put everyone on mute except for our speaker to avoid any disruption. Towards the end, there will be a 10-minute questionnaire session. Please stay until the very end as we'll be sharing a feedback form that must be filled in order for you to obtain your certificates for this webinar. This session is being recorded as well, which we will upload to our YouTube channel. In today's webinar, we delve into the boundless possibilities and benefits that AI brings into the realm of education. With this, we will prepare to unlock a world of efficient, creative, and personalized teaching, tailored to meet the unique needs of both educators and learners. Without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Mark Burnett. Mark Burnett is an educator, researcher, a tech professional, consultant, and a PhD student. His research interests include studying how children learn digital skills and exploring constructionist learning environments. He's passionate about project-based learning and teaching students to create with tools and technologies. With over 15 years of experience in STEAM and maker education, he has worked with teachers and administrators all over the world to set up and design impactful learning experiences with makerspaces, digital labs, and project based learning pedagogical approaches. We are really eager for you to share your wisdom with us, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Prasanna. Um, Thanks for all of the accolades, and I'm happy to be here to share with all of you. And just a little background information. I live in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I have been researching artificial intelligence for over 4 years now, currently pursuing my PhD at Chiang Mai University. And so it's been very interesting to go from 4 years ago, where artificial intelligence was something only nerds talked about, to now something that is in the hands of every person on the planet who has access to the internet. So what a rapid change that has occurred in such a short amount of time. So I'm happy to share with you my perspectives on this. And I also want to share, especially for teachers, how they can approach artificial intelligence, use it to their advantage, and also to save time, because educators are busy teaching, which is the #1 priority of the educator. So I want to share with you today some tips and strategies for how to reduce the workload so that you can easily send emails, make lesson plans, and create quizzes. And so today, along the way, I'm also going to give you an opportunity to be interactive. So I will be sharing with you some links and some activities to follow along with. So may I share my screen now? Okay.
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Fantastic. So I'll share my screen because I have a presentation to go through. And like mentioned earlier, any questions that you have, just share those at the end, and I'll be glad to answer. All right, let me just move some things around on my desktop so I am all organized and tidy. Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit already about the topic, and I want to explain a little bit more about the rest of the aspects of this particular training. And so in the realm of artificial intelligence, you may have heard this term called a large language model. And today I'm going to break down what that means and how it can be used, and some additional information about the different types of large language models. I think it's always important from an educator perspective to talk about the pedagogical approaches with any technology. So the particular pedagogical approach that I always lean upon and trust upon is a theory of education called constructionism, of which I will share more with you about in detail. And then lastly will be the interactive activities that I have designed for all of us to try some prompting with artificial intelligence, which are all aimed at helping the educators save time with resource management. So just a little bit about my company, BSD Education. We are a global education technology company, and we provide services, support, and classroom tools for teachers. So our main priority is providing curriculum around digital skills. So teaching students about the necessary technology advancements like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, Web3, and we also teach students how to code along the way, and we provide training and support so that educators feel confident with teaching technology. So BSD stands for Build Something Different, and our company follows in the footstep of that message. And so it is our goal to build something different for students and educators, because we know that digital skills and technology and things like coding and programming are difficult tasks and difficult subjects, and not every teacher feels comfortable with that. So our curriculum and our platform allows any teacher, regardless of their skill and ability, to teach concepts in technology, digital skills like web development, game development, artificial intelligence, data science, and so on. But I'm not here to tell you so much about my company, but I'm here to tell you about how you can use AI. And we discussed a little bit already about my accolades and my career. And my role at BSD is the Vice President of Education, and I oversee our team's development of curriculum, professional development, delivering webinars like this to people like you. And my PhD research is weaved in between all of those things. So let's dive right into the meat of today's topic. What is a large language model? I mentioned earlier that it's just a branch of the field of artificial intelligence. So when I first started studying artificial intelligence in 2018, 2019, artificial intelligence was still something to kind of laugh at. You know, it could do some pretty interesting things, but you know, it wasn't perfect. So this picture on the left is an actual example of what AI was capable of doing. So, you know, it's like, you know, some people have always had this mindset with new technology, like, oh, it's going to be so bad, it's going to take over the world. But in reality, you know, it was still labeling pictures of cats as dogs. But then something radical happened. Last year in November, almost a year ago, ChatGPT was released to the world, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And it could change the way that we view artificial intelligence, and it continues to be astounding with its capabilities. So now people are taking it seriously. People are no longer laughing at AI and what it can do, because there have been results to show otherwise. So I just like to make a little joke at this, you know, that, you know, in such a short amount of time, you know, the whole world is now talking about artificial intelligence. Whereas in 2019, when I started my research, it felt like it was just researchers and nerds, computer engineers and scientists who were really studying artificial intelligence. So just real quick before we move any further, if you want to participate in today's interactive activities with me, I'm going to be using a website called Poe.com. And there are lots of other similar large language models available online. You've already heard of ChatGPT probably. ChatGPT isn't available in every territory. So this is why we have some alternatives. We've already confirmed that Poe.com works all over India. So if you haven't already created an account for Poe.com, what I want you to do right now is actually just go to Poe.com and make an account, so that when we get to the interactive parts of this webinar, then you can participate. And anything that I say right now, you can just check out on the recording. Okay, so Poe.com is the website. Now, if you already have access to ChatGPT or any others, that's cool too. You can use those for this. This is just for those of you who don't have access to a large language model at the moment. But the cool thing about Poe.com is that it's actually my favorite large language model, because it's a multiple model platform, which means that it doesn't just have one large language model, it has several. It has ChatGPT, Claude, which is another famous one, and several others that you may have not heard of. But another cool thing about Poe.com is that you can even make your own bot, but that's something that I think is more reserved for advanced users after you've already learned quite a bit about how the large language models work. So like I said, make that account if you haven't done it so that we can do the interactive activities together. So now I want to explain a little bit more about chatbots and artificial intelligence and how these things kind of came to be. And the best way that I can describe for you to understand the intelligence model of a large language model is to imagine that the large language model is a child born into the world with absolutely no knowledge. It knows nothing. It's an infant. All it knows how to do is to breathe and cry. Okay? So then we take this infant and we give it information. We give it knowledge. We give it examples so that it starts to have information that it can use. So just like a regular child, it only learns what it has been shown. So a young child is able to identify its mother because that's what it sees most often. If a young child was shown a hamster every day of its life, it would learn what a hamster is. So large language models are like humans, that they only learn what they're shown. And they use their model or their mind to take in all of the information that it's learned. And all it can do is compare and contrast the similarities and the differences between those things. And with those similarities and differences, it is able to make predictions and assumptions based on all of that data. Okay, so large language models are based on written language, words of multiple languages, spoken languages, and a very wide variety of those words. But there are some limitations, so they're not perfect. So large language models are not a super intelligence. So really, the only thing that they're good at is reading and writing with the use of words, okay? So it isn't intelligent enough to, solve climate change. It's not intelligent enough to, do its own actions. It can only understand the realm of words. So what that means is that it isn't really great at math or computation. So even if we were to use words to describe a mathematical equation, most large language models right now wouldn't be very good at solving the mathematical computation. Now, there are AIs that are designed specifically to handle mathematical equations and models, which are starting to be integrated into large language models. So this is changing rapidly. So I think within the next year, all of the ChatGPT models that we are using will be able to equally do mathematical computations. One other limitation is that most of these large language models do not have current news because they do not currently scrape what is on the internet. They only take information that was previously released on the internet. Another limitation is that sometimes it makes up false details, which is incorrect information, okay? And so on the previous screen, I said that these large language models are able to make predictions or assumptions. And we all know what happens with humans when we make assumptions. Sometimes they're not right. And so the same thing is true with large language models. Since they are free to make assumptions, sometimes those assumptions end up looking like false information, inaccurate information, or outright lies. So we have to be careful with this information. We must analyze it through our human minds before we use it in certain situations. And also, this is not a genie in the bottle that can predict the winning lottery numbers or to grant you wishes, to make up fantasies in your mind. It's a tool. And so we must learn how to use the tool in the ways that it was designed so that it can do what we want it to do with these limitations in mind. So how did the chatbot get so knowledgeable? How did it learn what it learns? Well, if we think about all of the books that have ever been written that are available on the internet, every single word that is written on Wikipedia which is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, of very long pages, and also any other open source textbooks. Those are textbooks from academia, from K-12, and even higher ed. So we're talking about every subject known to man. If there's a textbook that was written about it, and that textbook is available online, then these large language models have read those books and understand those books in a way that the large language model makes sense of text. So there is a lot of knowledge to be had here. Imagine if you read that much, if you read that many books. First of all, it would take a very long time. And after you read all of those things, you would have a lot of information. So you would be able to explain things easy. So that's what these large language models have done. Since they're not human and they can compute thousands of bytes of information at a time, they can read all of these books very, very quickly. And then they can take all of the knowledge from those books and they start to make predictions and assumptions on the in-between knowledge between all of those different sources. So that's kind of the best way that I like to explain how these large language models work without getting into technical details. So I've got an activity for us to do now, because I want you to kind of think like a large language model. So on the screen in front of you, I have a selection of text. And what I'd like you to do is just to take a moment to read the text on the screen. Just take in the text. Don't try to analyze the text or figure out what it is or what it means or what its purpose is. Just read the text and absorb the information. Absorb the word. Some of these words formulate partial aspects of sentences. Some of the words are random. But what I want you to do is get a sense of the collection of the words, not paying attention to just one or another word, but get a sense of the whole body of this information. And if I was training a large language model, this is exactly what I would be doing. I would just be providing text, providing information. So I'll give you just another few moments to look at all of the words on your screen. It may not make any sense to you right now, because we're going to go through a process of how a large language model interprets information like text. Okay, so you've had a good look at all of these words. Maybe you didn't read every single one of them, but you've got a gist of what these words are collectively as a group of words. Okay, so I'm going to advance the screen now to go deeper into this process. So this is a word cloud, and the word cloud shows us the frequency of words visually. So the larger the word is on the screen, the more frequently that word was used in the previous selection. So we're taking information and then we're now synthesizing it into a visual format. So we're making sense of the information. We're using a data analytics process to visualize. We see that the word cat, the word good, the word mother, these words were used more frequently than the tiny words like mind or cup. Okay, so we're starting to get a sense of what this data is. So now I have an activity for you. I want you to take a look at all of the words on this list. Which of these words is most likely not to match the original data set? So think back to the original data set, the green letters, all of those words together. Which of these words is most likely to not be a part of that data set? Or which ones might likely to be found in that data set? And you're welcome to post to the chat. I'm not currently looking at the chat. I'm not going to look at the chat until we're done, but I will gladly look at them later. But this is more of a mental exercise for you. I'm getting some feedback on I don't know if someone has had their mic off, but
Mark, it's me, Prashansa.
yes.
So I'm reading out the responses to you. Some of the responses we have got so far are spectrometry, extensions, geopolitics, thermalite, volcanization, erosion.
Yes. All right. Thanks for sharing those. Perfect. And thank you for coming on with the microphone. Correct. Yes. So those longer words, those technical words are not a part of the original data set. Environmentalism, geopolitics, correct. Right. So how did you know that? Well, you had to use your ability to predict and to assume, because you looked at the original data set and you had a sense of what it contained. And you may have noticed patterns inside of that data set. And you noticed that these words do not fit that pattern. And this is exactly the way that large language models work. They are given a selection of text. They are allowed to make connections between the words in that text. And then when new text is shown to it or questions are asked to it, it can make predictions and assumptions based on the patterns that it finds. So it is very similar to how the human mind operates. And once we realize that a large language model operates very similar to how our own minds operate, we have a new power to interact with the large language model. So I'm wondering if anyone start to guess where this original text came from. So the original text that I showed you, this one, came from a source, which I will now reveal to you. The training data came from this famous children's book, The Cat in the Hat by Dr. Seuss. Now, this book has some regional significance in different parts of the world. I find that this book is well known throughout the Western world, in Europe and America, and parts of the Eastern world. So maybe, I'm not sure how well this book is known in India or the author, Dr. Seuss. And if you do know, then that makes this a little bit easier for you to understand. And this example a little bit more relevant to you. But Dr. Seuss is a popular children's book that is read to children all over the world. So whether you were able to predict whether the source came from a certain author or not, that isn't relevant. But the activity itself of you being able to understand how AI uses training data is the important aspect of that. But this activity isn't quite over. I've got one more thing that I want us to do. So I want you to think back to the original training data, the words that were used, the length of those words, thinking now about the audience of those words, knowing that this is a children's book, and so that the vocabulary is written to the level of children under the age of 10 or so. So now that you have context about the use and the purpose of the data, what I'd like you to do now is, using that knowledge and your ability to predict and assume, I want you to complete these sentence prompts. And for these, you are welcome to type the answer into the chat, or you can just think about it mentally. There is no right or wrong answer to complete these sentences, but I want you to think like a large language model, using the data that was provided in the original training set, knowing the audience, knowing the relevance of the book. How would you complete these sentences with only that knowledge? And just so I can stay on track with time, I'm just going to keep on going. This was just a little teaser activity to get us into the mindset of thinking like a large language model, because eventually we're going to move into the idea of prompts. And so prompts are the way that we speak to large language models, and large language models give back to us their predictions and their assumptions. Now, before we go into using the artificial intelligence tools, From an educator perspective, I think it's always important to talk about the pedagogical approach. How we use tools and how we use technology is actually more important than the technology itself. So I always refer back to constructionism as the root foundation for how I view all pedagogical aspects of any technology. And if you've never heard of constructionism, that's okay. You can research that a little bit more later. But constructionism comes from Professor Seymour Papert, who was a professor at MIT in the late 1960s and 70s. And we know his work very well because of his legacy. It is because of Seymour Papert that we have computer programming in schools, that we have robotics in schools. You may have even used some of his research if you've ever programmed in the Logo programming language or used a Lego robot. And so Seymour Papert's vision was that children would learn with these tools, with technologies that are advanced, like programming and computers and robotics. And even in the late 1960s, Seymour Papert envisioned that AI would eventually be available for children to use. So the theory in education of constructionism always boils down to children using tools and technologies to grow their own understanding, not only of the thing that they are using, but also of themselves. So we learn about ourselves through constructing things in the world around us. And whether we're constructing physical things like robots or constructing mental things in our mind, we're both learning about ourselves and learning about the things that are tangible in front of us. So this deep pedagogical approach to learning can apply to pretty much anything that we're learning, whether it's AI or learning how to do a bodily movement. If I'm learning how to do an asana for the first time in yoga, it's not easy. I've got to learn through the experience, and I learn about myself while I do the activity. It applies to everything that you do in life. And so Seymour Papert would argue that AI presents an opportunity for us to think differently. And just like when calculators started to disrupt mathematics, we didn't say, throw away the calculators, but we encouraged the use of calculators because we realized that they would not necessarily replace thinking, but instead they would enhance our thinking, which would allow us to free up the mental energy for deeper thinking about mathematical concepts. So AI can also be seen this way, as a collaborator, as a co-teacher, as a tutor, but not a replacement for learning. And AI will allow us to free up mental energy so that we can use our minds for deeper thinking. In the early 1990s, Seymour Papert wrote this book called The Children's Machine, Rethinking School in the Age of the Computer, at a time when only a fraction of the world's children had access to computers. So you can see he was a very forward thinker. And Seymour Papert said this quote, which I'd like to highlight from the book. Reading and writing would be demoted from the primary pedestal of education once knowledge machines are fully available. And what Seymour Papert means by knowledge machines is this is the term that he gave to artificial intelligence before artificial intelligence became what it is today. In his theory of knowledge machines, he envisioned that children would be able to ask computers questions and that the computer would respond with intelligent information, which is what is now available to us with large language models. And so Seymour Papert also said, AI should become the methodology for thinking about ways of knowing. And so that's a very metacognitive statement. If you really unpack that, ways of knowing, there are many ways of knowing, and there are many methods for thinking about ways of knowing. And AI should just simply be one of those. I'll leave you with my final statements about Seymour Papert and his theories. And these are his three approaches to AI. He thinks that we should allow teachers and students to tinker with AI so that they can draw their own conclusions, which is always the best way to learn anything. He thinks that we should design activities that include AI as a co-creator, both for teachers and for students, and that we should explore a variety of AI tools to gain a sense of how they can be most used effectively and for which reasons. So if you want to learn more about Seymour Papert and his legacy and contributions to the field of artificial intelligence, which all laid the foundation for what we have today, I encourage you to research more on your own. And now we move into the activity aspect of this webinar, where you get to participate alongside me. So if you haven't heard the term prompt engineering, it's a fancy term for speaking to the large language model in a way that you get it to do what you want it to do. So a prompt is just a sentence starter or a question, and engineering means just tinkering around with things and figuring out the internal aspects of how things work. So I'm going to share with you some strategies and some things that you can do on your own. We'll do a few together just so you get the feel for it. I mentioned earlier that we're going to be using this website, Poe.com. So if you haven't already, go ahead and load up Poe.com in a separate window or a separate tab or whatever. And I'll be switching back and forth on my computer to these as well. So we're going to be using prompts, and we're going to give these prompts to the large language model. And we'll test the effect to see which is different or which is better. So the prompt on the left, I want you to read that to yourself, and then read the prompt on the right. And I'll give everybody a moment to do that. So one thing that large language models can do really well is they're great at writing emails for you. And how many of you love writing emails? Probably not many. I know I don't. But I can use a large language model to write the email for me. But I need to give the large language model the necessary information so that it writes the email that I want it to write. So you can see the left prompt is very vague and does not contain all of the necessary information, whereas the prompt on the right has all of the necessary information. So what we can do now is we can take both of these prompts and we can put them into Poe.com. And let me drop a link into the chat box. Just let me find one sec. All right, so in the chat just now, I've put a link to a document. That way you can just copy and paste these prompts. So if I go to that link now, you can see what it looks like. This is the link. And so the very first example, I can copy that. And then I'm going to go to Poe.com and I'm going to paste it. And on Poe.com, just real quickly, like I mentioned earlier, there are several large language models, but the automatic that is automatically set to is the assistant. And the assistant is a cool feature on Poe.com. And what it does is it looks at your prompt and then it chooses the best language model. So we have Claude and we have ChatGPT as the main, but when I use the assistant, I let Poe.com decide which of these models is best. So let's check it out. Let's see what Poe.com comes up with. All right, so this is the basic prompt. Can you write an email to parents about the fundraiser? All right, so it's going to do its best job. It's going to take what it knows, it's going to apply the prompt, and it's going to attempt to provide you, based on predictions and based on assumptions, this is what it provides. All right, so dear parents, I hope this email finds you, blah, blah, blah. And so, it tells you where information might be needed. So you might have to go back later and edit that. So, this isn't a bad email. It actually sounds pretty good and it gives us some information. It went ahead and assumed that there might be some cool stuff at this event, like live performances, game zones, bake sales, silent auction, raffle draw. We didn't tell it to write that stuff because it has the power to assume. So it just assumed that we were going to do these things. So if you don't want it to assume those things, then we have to provide it with more accurate and more necessary information. So I'm going to go back to, let's see. Sorry, I've got too many things on my screen here. The prompts. And now I'm going to copy the second prompt. I'm going to go to poe.com and I'm just going to continue right where I left off at the bottom where it says talk to assistant. I'm just going to paste the prompt here again. And now we can compare the results. So now I've got a subject line that's specific to my ask and my prompt. Now the email is saying exactly what I needed to say. There's still some missing information here, but we're on the right track. Now, here's another cool thing that we can do that isn't a part of my copy and paste. I could just ask poe.com, and this is how I work with large language models. I treat it like a real person. So I say thanks, and then I say, can you shorten the email to 5 paragraphs max? I hit enter, and then it rewrites the whole thing again with my new information. So chatbots start to become like real conversations. So when you get a result from the chatbot, you don't have to just take it. You don't just have to be like, okay, well, that's what it gave me, so that's what I'm going to use. No, you have a conversation and you can direct the chatbot to do more things. You can say shorten it. You can say lengthen it. You can say make it sound more inviting. You can say include the name of the school and the time and the date. So the more that you give it, the more that you will get back from it. So let me come back to my slide deck. So now that we've had a little bit of experience with the prompts, here are some tips that I'd like to suggest. So we can always be more specific. So we should include as much information as possible when we're writing the prompt, adding as many details as possible. And the way I like to think about the large language model is I like to think about it, and this is because I have a 17-year-old child. And so if I want my 17-year-old child to do something, I need to be very specific. I need to say when, I need to say, the duration, I need to provide all the details. So if I speak to the large language model like it's a 17-year-old child, then I'll remember, okay, I need to put in all the details, all the necessary information. I need to put the due dates, all of that. So you describe the restraints, you describe the links and the details, and you include any specific names, places, etc. So you have to imagine that your 17-year-old chatbot doesn't know everything. It knows a lot of things, but it doesn't know personal information about you or your school. So you have to provide that information. It can do its best to fill in the blanks, but the more you give it, the better the result you'll get. Okay, so let's look at some other examples. All right. So thinking about the best use of prompt engineering for teachers, lesson planning is one of those things that really takes up a lot of our time. And so we can use ChatGPT to help us design lessons. So check out this prompt. This one says, can you make a lesson plan designed to fill 3 hours of time? Notice I'm giving the time variable there, 1 hour each day. So I've made it really specific. The topic is coming from elementary science. So if you're a science teacher, this is a great one for you. The topic is food chain and food web, and the audience is grade 3 students. So I've given a lot of information about my audience and my specificity. So now I'm going to give it more information. Come up with one hands-on activity per session that lasts 20 to 30 minutes. Provide reflection questions, additional activities, and a vocabulary list. All right, so that's a lot of information that I'm going to give to the large language model. So I'm going to come back here to the prompts. You got this link already, and I'm going to copy this example number 3. I'm going to go back to poe.com, and I'm going to just start a new chat. So I can just click on the logo here in the left-hand corner, which will take me back to the home page. And I'm just going to paste in my new prompt. And I'll wait a moment and it's delivering right away. So you can see already it's breaking down the lesson plan into the specificity that I asked it to do. It's giving me day by day. It's giving me instructions. It's telling me the duration of that instruction. It's got my warm-up activity, my presentation, my group activity, my hands-on activity. It's all here, exactly the way I asked for it. And it's actually useful. This is the kind of stuff that I was going to plan anyway for my students. But now, the mental energy that it would take for me to write all of that, if I had to sit down and write this lesson plan, it could easily take me an hour. But now I have it. So my mental energy is free to actually prepare for this lesson. So I just read the lesson, pick it up, run with it, and I start to gather the materials and what I need for this lesson. And if I was to sit down and read this, it's actually pretty good. It does a good job. It's a high quality lesson. But I think there's room for improvement. So how could we improve this prompt? Let's take a look at another example following the same scenario. Okay, so now I'm going to expand a little bit more onto this. I'm going to add a little bit more pedagogical approaches. So I've got the same prompts. Give me a lesson plan for 3 hours, 1 hour each day. Topic is the same, food chain and food web. Same duration, same questions, activities, etc. But now I'm adding a new lens. I'm asking the large language model to follow a pedagogical approach of the 5E model of instruction. You know that one: explore, explain, elaborate, etc. We've all learned that at some point in our education career. And I've also asked it to provide one additional activity for students that are not native speakers of English. So I've got another layer of this. And then finally, here's a little trick that we have learned in the prompt engineering world. I've asked the large language model to metacognitively reflect on itself before answering, just like I would do. So I say, think carefully about the criteria of this prompt before responding, so that the large language model takes all this information in, stops and thinks about the best way to respond, then responds. Genius, I know, right? So let's go now check it out. So I'm going to come here to my document. I've got all this already easy for you to just copy and paste. I'm going to copy this, go back to poe.com, start a new thread, paste this in, and let's see the difference. So it's giving me a similar format. 1 hour each day. And depending on your network speed of your internet service provider, sometimes poe.com is really fast, like we're seeing now. Sometimes it's a little slower. So just have patience. So we can see it's continuing to write. I've got my day 1, the engage, the explore, just like I asked it to do with the 5E model. And it's still writing, so I need to be patient and just give it a little bit of time to finish up. There we go. And when I sometimes give a very large prompt to poe.com, what I might do is just, go to the toilet, go get a cup of water, let it really give it some time to analyze that data, because I did ask it to reflect before responding. So that usually adds a little bit of time. All right, so I can see it's still writing, it's still going. I've got the 5E model, I've got the different activities, I've got the pedagogical approach, I've got the activity for the non-native English speakers. Look at this differentiated instructional lesson plan that was just created for me in a blink of an eye compared to what it would take me to write that. So this is time saving, it's energy saving. You as the teacher can now take all that free time that was just given to you so you can do the real work of teaching with your students, preparing things, getting ready for the day, meditating, doing yoga, whatever you got to do. So these large language models are liberating to us. They free up all of the things that we would normally spend hours and hours and hours doing. And it's still high quality. Let's continue our journey with exploring prompt engineering. So I've shown you that you can, build a very complex prompt and get a very detailed and useful result. So here is my formula for lesson planning. I've already shown you the example with the grade 3 and the science of the food web and food chain, etc. So here's the formula if you want to make your own lesson. Let's say you're not a grade 3 teacher and you don't teach science. You're a grade 10 algebra teacher. Here's the formula. You describe the duration of the lesson in great detail. 3 hours, 1 time a day, or whatever. It's 45 minutes, 3 times a week. We meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it is. Put it in there. The audience, don't just say grade 3. Say grade 3 students that have a lexile ability of blah, blah, blah. Add as much information as you want. Pedagogical style, whatever method you use. You want to put the 5E model in there? You want to do project-based learning? You want constructionism? Pop it in there. Other specific requirements. Oops, I went too far. Any other specific requirements like, do I need something for a specific student or a specific learner or a specific type of equipment? Or maybe we need to say like, we only have pencils, paper, and chalkboards. Make an activity using only those materials. Constraints, same thing. Specific requirements, similar. Any additional needs? And then finally, the magic sauce that just makes it all work really well is to add the statement at the end. Think about this prompt before responding. And this is a thing we can add to pretty much any prompt, asking it to think before responding. It's just adding another layer of metacognition that the chatbot does for itself. So now, no matter what subject you teach, no matter what grade level you teach, you have a formula so that you can make your own lessons using this large language model. Now, if you're not going to use it for lesson planning, you can use it for pretty much any other task. And so this is another formula called the general purpose formula, otherwise known as RTRI, which stands for role, task, requirements, and instructions. And so with this formula, we have a new type of prompting that I haven't introduced to you yet, which is called act as. So you could say, act as an expert scientist in the field of geology. Or, act as pretty much anything. Then you write the task, then you put the requirements and the restraints, and then you give the specific instructions. There is so much that you can do with this formula. There are so many tasks that you can automate and save time by using just this simple formula. So here's an example. And I'm going to take it back to the activity that we did earlier. So here is the example. For the role, act as author Dr. Seuss. For the task, write a short story about the food web. So now I'm connecting it back to my lesson. See how it all connects? Requirements. Include relevant science vocabulary like producer, consumer, and decomposer. Instructions, complete a short story, 5 to 6 paragraphs maximum, then stop and produce a separate version containing the exact same story, but with fill in the blank spots for students to add their own words. So what have I done just now? I created a worksheet based on this lesson plan, a fill in the blank worksheet. Don't believe me? Try it out for yourself. Let's go back to my copy and paste document. I'm going to take the RTRI example, the one with Dr. Seuss. Let's check it out. Go back to poe.com, start a new thread, paste it in, hit enter. And what do we get? A story in the voice of Dr. Seuss about the food web and the food chain using my vocabulary words, producer, consumer, decomposer. It's still going. Remember I said 5 or 6 paragraphs? It usually hits the ballpark. Continuing on to there's the end of the story. And so it gave me a prompt here and said it's time for you to create your own version of the enchanting tale. use your imagination to fill in the blanks with the words. So it didn't give me the fill in the blank like I asked for. So I'm going to just ask it again. Can you make the fill in the blank story for me? There we go. Now we've got it. So the funny thing is that I used this exact same prompt earlier today just to test it out. And the first time I used it, it made the fill in the blank for me in my original prompt. So this brings another important point that I want to bring to you about these large language models, is that they don't always behave the exact same way every single time. Just like when you ask your 17-year-old student to take out the trash, sometimes they do it right. Sometimes they forget to put the bag in when they're done. So think about it like that. Let me return back to my slides here. So all of these examples you can continue to tinker with and explore with. This is the last one I want to share with you, because when it comes to tasks that teachers have to do on a regular basis, sending emails, writing lesson plans, and assessments. Aha! We can also use it to help us make assessments. Now, I wouldn't use ChatGPT to make every assessment, but it's really good at making these quiz type assessments. So here is a different kind of prompt. Instead of giving ChatGPT all of the criteria and information for my quiz, so instead of saying, make a quiz about the food chain and the food web that includes these vocabulary words, make it so it's available for grade 3, make sure there's only 5 answers, make sure blah, blah, blah. No, this is a different kind of prompt where we are asking the large language model to behave as a quiz maker. So then the large language model is going to take this prompt and then it's going to ask me, hey, who's this quiz for? What is the topic of the quiz? Then we start to work together. So now the large language model is a co-collaborator with me. And these are the kind of prompts that will really level up your ability to master large language models, so that you start to co-create with the large language model instead of just telling it what to do. So let's check out this one. I'm going to go back to my copy and paste document, copy this. I'm going to start a new thread, paste it in there. And so if it works correctly, it should ask me a question now. And we can see that it has asked me 2 questions. So now I'm having a conversation with the chatbot. It's not just a one-way street. So now it says, what specifically should the quiz test? For which audience is the quiz? Now, I'm not going to use our time today to continue on with that. I want you to experiment and tinker with this. So if you were going to continue, then you would type in, the quiz is on food chains, decomposers, blah, 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 blah. Number 2, the students are grade 3 and their level of speaking is blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool. Then it will generate the quiz, or it may ask you for more clarifying questions because we have given it the role of a quiz maker. So right now, the large language model is behaving the way Seymour Papert envisioned, as a co-collaborator, as a tool, as a knowledge machine, so that we can co-construct together with the tool, not just using the tool for gathering information or getting something out of it, but I'm really learning about the tool and I'm learning about myself along the way, because I have to reflect and think about what is the best way for me to ask this question? What is the most concise way that I can convey what I want so that I can get the result that I need? So let me just wrap up with a few tips. I think it's important that we always tinker. And this is a vision from the field of constructionism as well. Tinkering, playing, exploring, trying over and over again. Sometimes we encounter difficulties and failures, but we don't give up. We keep trying. And so, like I showed you earlier with the example of the fill in the blank, my first prompt, it didn't give me the fill in the blank. So what did I do? I rephrased and asked again, hey, give me the fill in the blank. What did I get? I got the result I wanted. So if you don't get the result immediately that you want, don't give up. Go back and rephrase, re-edit, keep trying. Remember to interact with the chatbot like it's a real conversation. You can tell it, hey, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Can you try it again, but with this instead? And you treat it like a real person and speak to it like a real person. Like I mentioned earlier, like a 17-year-old child. And if you think about it like that, that will remind you to provide all of the details. So I want to share with you just a few things that can take your journey further with some resources that we have at BSD. We have put together a 3-hour self-paced course, which is a deep dive into mastering prompts just like this. But instead of using Poe.com, we have our own chatbot that you can interact with. And using our methods that we have designed specifically for educators, you can go deeper into creating educational resources, such as lesson plans, quizzes, emails, educational resources, additional textbook guides, tutoring chatbots, and more. And we'll send you a link so that you can check this out after the session is over. I've also got a document which contains a lot of the tips and tricks that I've shared with you today, some example prompts, and some guidance for how you can best implement using large language models. So SAR Education and BSD have come together to produce this, which we will share with you in an email once the session is over. And lastly, for those of you that really like to nerd out and get on that research level, I'm going to share with you a recent research publication. This is very recent research. And there are 2 professors at the Wharton School and at the University of Pennsylvania that are just pumping out phenomenal research around using ChatGPT and large language models for educators. And so this is a research paper called 5 Effective Strategies for Prompting in the Classroom. So this document will also be shared with you. And even if you're not a researcher, even if you don't typically read this type of material, there are some really good prompts from this research that you may want to check out. As a matter of fact, the prompt that I shared with you earlier for the quiz maker, this one, came directly from that research, though I modified it slightly. So that brings us to the end of this session. I hope that it has been valuable for you. I hope that you find it useful. I hope that you will continue to tinker with large language models in the future. And I hope that it allows you to save time as an educator so that you can do what you were dream of doing as an educator, what you came into the profession to do, to actually teach children. So let us use these tools and technologies to enhance our ability and to help us save time. Thank you all. And let us now continue with the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that. And as you can see in the chat, it's pouring in. Everybody's really happy with the session. And I think all of us found it really useful. It's relevant to us. My biggest takeaway was that I would speak to a chatbot like I would speak to a 17-year-old assistant. We need to be patient with AI. And I would request the audience to send in your questions so Mark would answer them. So Mark, we have already received some questions and I will just get them to you.
Yeah, please pick them for me because there's so many coming, I can't see them all.
Yeah, okay. So I have some already and I will be asking them. So are you ready?
Please go ahead.
All right, okay. So Ms. Shivani Sharma and Krishna Srivastav in the chat, they've asked if you can share any AI that can help us with animations.
With animations, yeah, so graphic animations. Right now there are a few different models that are being tested, and a lot of them you have to pay money for. And so I'll have to get back with the exact one that I'm thinking of, but there are a few that I have found that are free. That I'll have to look at. I have like a list on another desktop with like all of these tools, and maybe what I'll do is just kind of share a list of like my favorite tools for image, for text, for audio, and for video. And then that way it kind of is useful to everyone.
Okay, that would be great. So you would be sharing that list in an email, I suppose, or would you be sharing it right now?
I'll share the list to SAR Education so
Okay.
that when we send the follow-up email, it will contain several things, like the link to the video, this recording, the link to my copy and paste document, the link to our collaborative document, as well as a link to the research. So the follow-up email, you'll receive a few things.
Okay, so we'll wait for that, and I'm sure. So another question we have got is from Ms. R. Ratan. She asked, can we ever be too dependent on the AI craze? Does it ever hamper our creativity and originality?
I would say that it actually enhances our creativity and originality, but it depends on how you use it. If you give your creativity away to ChatGPT, then it's not beneficial. But if you use it to enhance your creativity as a co-collaborator, then it is mutually beneficial. And it can enhance your ability to create and make things because it can give you suggestions and ideas for things that you hadn't even thought of. For example, in the lesson plan where I asked it to make ideas for the food web and food chain, it came up with an activity that I had never done before. And I even thought to myself, wow, that's pretty cool. I would actually try that in the classroom. So it comes up with new ideas.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We have another question from Mumtaz Khan, and she's asking, will this help for children observation and profile writing? Do you think is that possible?
Yeah, so if we're going to use this to help us write summaries and profiles or assessments of student ability, just remember my analogy. Does the 17-year-old person have the ability to write that? And the answer is maybe, but you as the teacher would need to provide ample amount of data so that it could write that. And so in my work, sometimes I have to write reports and summaries of projects that we've been working on. And so instead of asking ChatGPT to say like, can you write a summary of my report for this month? It's going to be like, well, I don't know how to write that. You need more information. So if you're able to provide a sufficient amount of information, the large language model can take that and format it into a very friendly format and use clever language to more efficiently describe what you meant to say. So I think it's something that we should play with, but not something we should rely on completely.
Could you maybe share an example prompt for the same if I'm if I'm doing the profile writing? So what prompt should I give to the AI? Any example?
An example for which?
For profile writing for my students.
Yeah, so if we go back to the example that I shared earlier, the general purpose example, that general purpose formula is a magic tool that works in so many different scenarios because it tells you to act as, so you could say, act as an expert, reviewer. Here is the information about the student. Here are the results that the student has had on their previous assessments. Can you write a report now that summarizes the highlights of the student's work, but also make sure to show where the student could improve? And you'll get a pretty good result from that. Now, I would probably take that, drop it into a Word document, and then edit it a little bit, making sure that it's accurate to what I see, but it's saving time. That's what you've got to think about. How can I use this tool to save time? Not how can I use this tool to do my job for me? You want to use it as a co-teacher, a co-worker, an assistant. It's not replacing you, it's just helping you.
I think that's helpful advice, and the prompt you shared would be really helpful. I think that formula applies at a lot of places. So with that, we have another question from Ms. Rita Nanda, and I think it's going to be a tough one to answer. how can we really check for the authenticity of content given to us by AI?
So this past year, especially with ChatGPT, it hasn't necessarily given us the ability to authenticate the resources, the citations, or the source of the information. That is changing. So the large language models, they don't just have a fixed amount of knowledge, but their knowledge increases with each use. And so over time, they get better at doing what they're supposed to do. And since so many people have asked for this problem to be solved, the engineers who create these large language models have decided that it must be a priority for the large language model to produce a source and a citation. So if you're using Poe.com and you're looking for a source or a citation, I recommend that you switch over to Claude. Claude is used in the academic field. I use it for my PhD research because I can count on it to provide the resources and the citations. And if it doesn't provide them, I can say, hey, can you give me the citation for what you just said? And it will provide that. I can click on the link and it takes me to the source and then I can verify it. So it depends on the large language model that you use. Currently, ChatGPT does not have that feature. Claude has it. But given the nature of these things, I imagine that they all will soon. Good question.
Yeah, yes, I believe that was a good question. So another question we'll take up. I think a lot of us face the problem when we send some, question to the AI, we get wrong answers. So how can we rephrase our prompts? Would you have any suggestions for that? Like, we know that we have to rephrase it, but is there any certain language or examples you could give us?
Okay, this is a very common problem too. So there's usually a diagnostic that we can use to assess the problem. So if you ask it something and you get the wrong answer, first you want to look at your prompt. Did your prompt actually contain enough information for it to be answered? Use the lens of the 17-year-old. If you were to ask that prompt to a 17-year-old, could they answer the problem to you? If the answer is no, your prompt is no good, okay? Now, another thing is that maybe you're asking it about something it doesn't even know about. So if you said, you know, if you were to ask a large language model right now, if you were to say, what color are trees on Mars? It would give you an answer. But would that answer be correct? Probably not. So you have to realize that the large language model, what it's really doing is it's predicting and assuming. So you have to leave in the possibility that there could be a wrong answer there. All right. Now, one way that we use to combat this, I showed it to you earlier in my prompt example. And I said to give this final thought to the prompt. Think through this before you respond. And you wouldn't believe the difference that prompt makes. So if you add that prompt, that little phrase to the end of your prompts, it changes the result significantly sometimes.
Yeah, I think we have to cross-check everything, even though we are using AI. And whatever you shared, Mark, was truly helpful to us. All your advices, all your formulas, we never even thought of it as a formula. So thank you so much for that. And with that, I think we'll conclude the questionnaire session. And we thank you again so much for coming here and taking the time out to be with our audience and giving us such useful information. And I think now our prep time would be reduced after, hearing from you, after learning from you. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you all for your time. And like I mentioned earlier, all of the resources that I shared in the call today will be put into links and shared back out to you through email.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of learning for us, all of us over here as well in SAR. It was really nice.
Good. I hope that large language models can save you time too.
Yeah, we are hoping to do that. And especially like thinking of it as a step of as an algorithm, like asking the prompt like in 4 or 5 different steps, and especially like, okay, reviewing it. That's we never did. We
Yeah.
also ask like revise, but we never ask like, okay, check your answer. So that was like something amazing.
Yeah. There's starting to become kind of like an unlimited potential for the things that we can ask it to do. And I really think that this is changing the world. And we will just continue to see its growth and acceleration. And so that means that we as educators must prepare ourselves. And the only way to prepare ourselves is to play with it, to tinker with it, to explore with it, and to take on learning like this.
Well, thank you so much. And I have never seen like in past 6 months so many thank you messages in between of any session, and this was really special. And I think like people should go for a prompt engineering course as a CPD to make themselves like to give them themselves ahead as compared to the other community teachers.
Yeah, I've just shared only a taste of what
Yeah.
is possible with the prompting.
It will give them an edge. So I think,
Yeah.
so we all look forward for doing it, and let's see how the thing goes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, most welcome. And thank you all.
All right, thank you, ma'am. So again, you must see in the chat how knowledgeable your session was and how impressed the audience was. I mean, I cannot express enough. So thank you again for coming.
Most welcome.